This is Lesson 16, Part 1, and we will be covering dotted note values.
Returning to our note value pyramid, let's just run through a few examples of time signatures. So let's start with 2/4 time. The top number will tell us that there are 2 beats in every measure. And remember that a measure or bar is the area between 2 bar or measure lines. The bottom number tells us what kind of note value gets a beat. So we could think of it as the denominator of a fraction, and that will remind us that a quarter note will be equal to 1 beat, or that'll be our beat or pulse note. So returning up here to the pyramid, let's just go ahead and assign our specific beat values. So we know that a quarter note will be worth 1. Half note, which is worth 2 quarter notes, is going to be worth 2. And a whole note, which is worth 4 times as much as 1 quarter note, is going to be worth 4 beats. That means our 1/8 notes will be our half beat notes, and it means our 16th notes will be our quarter beat notes, okay? So what I want to run through here is then how we apply our Gordon syllables to this scenario. So we remember that our 1 beat note is going to be do. So that means that our quarter note, since he's worth 1, that will be do, okay? And then we remember that our 1/8 notes will be worth half a beat each. So this is going to be together do, day, okay? So when we're saying that, we're always putting do on this first beat, and then our day will be splitting this exactly in half. 16th notes would be represented by a new Gordon rhythm pattern that I haven't yet introduced, and we're going to do today. These are your quarter beat notes, and we're going to say do, ta, day, ta, okay? So these are our new syllables, and what's kind of neat about this system is that the do continues to be aligned with the beginning of the beat. The day continues to fall exactly halfway through that beat, and then we throw these little tas. Let's do some blue for that. We throw the little tas in between. So we would say this quarter note as do, 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 do. The 1/8 notes would be do, day, do, day, do, day, do, day. And given that same tempo, the same speed, we would say do, ta, data, do, ta, data, do, ta, data, do, ta, data. Here's an alternative time signature. We could say 2 time. So the top number tells us there are 2 beats per measure. And the bottom number, if we think of it as a denominator of a fraction, reminds us that a half note will be 1 beat. Okay, and we can return to our pyramid and assign specific beat values now. So a half note equals 1 beat. A whole note is worth twice as much as a half note, so it's worth 2 beats. This is now our half beat note. The quarter note will be our half beat note, and 1/8 notes will be our quarter beats. These guys will only be worth an 1/8. Our 1 beat note is going to be our do. So now when we see a half note, we say do, okay? And then our quarter notes will now be our half beat notes. So we will say do, day. And our 1/8 notes will be our quarter beats. So we will say do, ta, day, ta. Red do's all fall on the beat. And then we'll put our days where they belong halfway through that do beat. Okay, so there's a day, here's a day, and then these quarter beats will be our little, they'll get extra syllables, do ta, data.
In everyday life, we measure duration in seconds, minutes, and hours, and music, we measure duration or time in beats and subdivisions of those beats. Beat is a recurring pulse in music, and just like a second hand on a clock, it is recurring and predictable and independent of anything else going on around it. Beats are grouped together in recurring patterns, and the first beat of that group is called the downbeat. It is emphasized, it is the strongest beat of the measure. Remember that beat is not actually visible on the score. Rhythm, on the other hand, is visible when we see the note and rest values on a score. A score, by the way, is just a piece of sheet music. It's an entire piece or song notated on sheet music. Remember that rhythm is when we start and stop sounds and when we start and stop silences. And rhythm is absolutely dependent on a pulse in order to be fully realized and performed. We are setting the metronome at 60 beats per minute, and we're going to first put that beat into our hands. We're grouping the beats into twos. 1, 2, ready, clap. And then we're going to say a 1 beat note followed by a pair of half beat notes. We're going to do that 4 times. 1, 2, ready, speak. Do, do, day, do, day, do, day, do, day. One more time. Ready, go. Do, day, do, day, do, day, do, day. We're now going to try using our new quarter beat notes. So we're going to say do, ta, data, and group 4 of those together. So each one of these is worth a quarter of a beat, meaning we're going to be splitting one metronome beat into 4 equal parts. Okay, here's our beat, metronome at 60, grouping beats into twos. We're going to say this pattern 4 times. We're going to say 4 sets of quarter beat notes. So 1, 2, ready, clap. 1, 2, ready, speak. Do-ta, data, do-ta, data, do-ta, data, do-ta, data. I'll try it one more time. Don't worry if it's tricky, we'll get there. 1, 2, ready, go. Do-ta, data, do-ta, data, do-ta, data, do-ta, data. Notice how the do still falls on the beat, and notice how the day is still halfway in between it.
We are on Unit 2, which is our rhythm unit, Lesson 7, dots, which is really referring to dotted note values. So let's just begin by reading together. The fourth measure in this musical example in 3/4 time signature is blank. Suppose we wanted to sing one note for the 3 beats in the measure. What note would we put there? So first of all, let's just take a moment to break down our time signature. The 3 on the top tells us that there are 3 beats per measure. And the bottom number tells us, if we think of it as the denominator of a fraction, that a quarter note equals 1 beat. So inserting our note and rest value pyramids here, we can see that if we assign 1 beat to each quarter note and quarter rest, we'll have 2 beats assigned to each half note and half rest, 4 beats to each whole note and whole rest, and just a half beat to an 8th note or 8th rest. So let's return to where we are reading. A quarter note gets 1 beat. Exactly, we figured that out. And a half note gets 2 beats. Right, we figured that out. But there's no note which gets 3 beats. And remember, Our time signature tells us that we need 3 beats in every measure. So is there a single note that we can use to fill in this measure? What do we do? As it turns out, we actually have additional note values to consider besides those found on our pyramid. We can take any one of these note values and we can actually alter it by dotting it. We just put a dot to the right of the note head. So this would be called a dotted whole note. This would be a dotted half note. This would be a dotted quarter note. And this would be a dotted eighth note. This would be a dotted 16th note. A dot adds duration or time to whatever note value it's dotting. Well, how much time? As it turns out, a dot in and of itself doesn't have a specific value. It is worth half of whatever note value it's dotting. So without yet assigning specific beats, we can say that a dotted whole note is going to be equal to a whole note plus half of that note value. So, well, a half note. And a dotted half note would be equivalent to, well, its actual note value plus half of that note value. The dot is worth half of a half note, so a quarter note. A dotted quarter note will be worth a quarter note, its actual note value, plus half of that note value. The dot is worth half of that note value, so an eighth note. A dotted eighth note is worth an eighth note plus half of that note value, which would be a 16th note. And a dotted 16th note would be worth a 16th note plus half of that note value, which is actually a 16th note with an extra flag. It's called a 32nd note. So let's return to the time signature that was presented in our lesson, 3/4 time. The top number tells us there are 3 beats per measure, and the bottom number tells us that a quarter note is the beat or pulse note. So 1 beat for quarter notes, 2 beats for half notes, 4 beats for whole notes, a half beat for each eighth note, and a quarter of a beat for each 16th. As of now, from this note value pyramid, I don't see any notes equivalent to 3 beats, which is what we need if we want a single note value that will take up one entire measure in 3/4 time. So let's try out our dotted note values and see if we can find one that is equivalent to 3 beats. So remember that our dotted whole note will be worth 4 beats for the whole note, plus the dot is going to be worth half of that note value. So if the whole note was worth 4, the dot is worth 2. Altogether, that's 6 beats. No, too many, right? So we have a dotted half note to consider next. Well, in this time signature, a half note alone will already get 2 beats. And then the dot that follows that note will be worth half of the note value. So half of 2 is 1. So 3 beats. Perfect. There's our winner. So we can take that dotted half note and put it right in this measure here. And that's all we'll need to complete this measure.